Yo, I have a 2011 Hyundai Sonata in here. The sticker on the door actually says June of 2010, but it's a 2011. I know that because I tried to order parts for it and it was a year off. I'm gonna bore you to death by putting some front end parts on this car. This little old lady can barely see over the steering wheel, so she runs over everything in her path. I got a little outer tie rod movement. I think the inner tie rods are tight. I don't know for sure. The outers are so loose on both sides I can't even be certain. So I'm going to replace these outer tie rods and then I'll shake it down, and if it's still loose I'll replace the inners. She's got a sway bar link here. If you can hear that, that's a little noisy. She's going to hear that going over bumps. So I'm going to replace both of those. She's also got a CV boot that's starting to tear. It's got some nice grease starting to get spit out of here. It's only a matter of time before that's going to crack all the way around and just lose all the grease. So I'm going to replace that axle. If I grab the tire in about the 4 o'clock position, opposite of the outer tie rod, I can see that this lower ball joint's just a little bit loose too, so I'm going to replace both lower ball joints, and then she's going to need an alignment after I get all this done. 21 millimeter on the lug nuts. Before I loosen this lock nut, I'm just going to put a mark on the top of this, just so I kind of get it in the right place. I'm going to do a thread count when I spin this outer tie rod out just to get it close so it's not like way off. Sometimes I got to use MAP gas on these nuts because they're really rusted. Looks like I got a 24 millimeter on this lock nut. Loosen that up. I have a little clip on this nut I need to get off. I'm just going to destroy it. I don't know. They come out a different way, but I don't really care because I'm going to put a cotter pin back in here. I'm pretty sure the tie rod I'm getting is going to have a castle nut on it. This is a 14 millimeter. There's a couple ways I can get this ball joint off. Either I can hit this knuckle with a hammer right here until it falls out, or I can use a pickle fork. I don't have to worry about destroying this boot, so I'm just going to pickle fork it with an air hammer. Now I'm going to unscrew this and I'm going to do a thread count. So the new outer tie rod I'll put on the same way. I got about 12 and a half turns out of it, so I'm going to write that down and remember it. I'm going to do the alignment guy a favor. I'm going to make sure these threads work really good. I'm just going to put a vice grip on the hex end. Put a little penetrant on these crusty threads. I'm going to get an impact and a 24 millimeter, and I'm just going to work these threads back and forth. Yeah, it's totally stuck. It's rusted stuck. Try this fancy little pipe wrench looking thing. Yeah. I'm just going to run this back and forth until these threads are clean. That should be good enough. That inner tie rod does feel tight, and it stays up on its own, so it's probably good. Luckily enough, these sway bar links have a couple of flats on the back of them. A lot of times they're round, so you got to use a vice grip or something. Looks like I can get a 17 millimeter on the back side of these. The nut's a 19. Oh yeah, it came right out. Amazingly enough, that was one of the easier link pins to take off of a car. Lower ball joint next. All these nuts and bolts on the lower ball joint are 17 millimeter. There's a cotter pin keeping this pinch bolt in. These pinch bolts are usually rusted in really good in this state. I'm just going to hose it down with some penetrant. I got a 17 millimeter swivel socket. I'm just going to put it on an impact and just try to loosen it up and get it out. I could just try to pry this lower control arm down to get the ball joint out of the way, but I'm not going to do that. It'll probably come out easier if I just unbolt it right now. And then 2 17s on the bottom. Give it a little persuasion with an air hammer. It's a little splined. Probably going to want to watch it. If you don't replace this axle, you're probably going to want to loosen up the axle nut and push the axle in to make sure that this axle doesn't come apart. I don't have to worry about that though, because I'm replacing it. I can get a pry bar in this pinch area just to try to spread this open a little bit. I'll hammer it in there. See if I can hammer this out of here now. Little more air hammer action. Now I'm going to get the CV axle out. Get this cotter pin off of here. I got an 1 1/4 socket here, whatever that is in metric. Now I can drive this axle through. I got to take off this big piece of plastic from underneath the car. Ew. She ran over a dirt mound of some kind. So I can get at that axle. These are all 10 millimeters. I gotta get on here with a pry bar and just give it a pop. And I can just take this big booger out. There's a collar that this shaft goes into, and the seal is on the outside, so I don't have to replace this seal. The instructions on the new axle told me to put some grease on this clip, so I did that too. Just make sure it's lined up in the splines. I'm just going to try to hammer it in there a little bit. Should be all I need to do. I just got to try not to rip this boot while I'm doing this ball joint for the rest of this procedure. Here's some part numbers. Chinese Master Pro made a little boo-boo here. They pressed the studs into the ball joint. It's the right ball joint. My Moog ball joint is right. They were out of Moog, so I had to get one Chinese. Looks like I'll have to pound these out of here. I squirted a little penetrant in this hole just because. I'm just going to pound a screwdriver in here, and it should loosen this thing up. I have one of these fancy units that go on the lower control arm. You stick a pry bar through here. The Moog ball joint kit gave me a package of red Loctite with no special instructions. I'm just going to assume right off they want it on everything. All of these bolts get torqued to 75 foot-pounds. I got those tight before putting this top bolt in to make sure it lines up nicely. I'll put a new cotter pin in here. Little 7mm jobby on this grease zerk. I'm going to put just enough in here to watch this boot expand. That's good. That's all I need. Got a tapered washer with this new axle. I want the tapered side up. This axle nut can get torqued anywhere from 160 to 180 foot-pounds. I'm just going to use a 140 foot-pound torque stick. Left that on for a good long while to make sure it don't go any farther. Then I'll just tweak it a little more. Now I'm going to just barely get this thing started. And there, it's just barely started. There's probably about 1/8 of a turn on there. Now I'm going to count my 12.5 turns. So it should be right there. That'll be close enough for now until she goes and gets in alignment. I'm going to lock this down, this nut, just a little bit. I'll get it tighter when I put this, after I put this in. This tie rod nut only needs to get tightened down to 30 foot-pounds. After I think I get it to 30 foot-pounds, I just got to keep tightening it until one of these holes line up. Put the cotter pin in it. I'm going to tighten up this tie rod nut now. I'm sure anywhere around 50 to 70 foot-pounds is good enough for that. I bet you won't even be able to find a torque spec on that. Just like the tie rod, there's a right and a left side on these link pins, so you got to make sure you put the right ones in the right spot. These get torqued to 75 foot-pounds too. These Moog link pins got 18 millimeters on them. These lug nuts get tightened to 80 foot-pounds. Now I'm just going to give this thing a shake. This way, and this way. Everything's super tight. So I just need to do the same to the other side. Put that black cover on. If you really want to tighten those bolts, I'd say 6 foot-pounds. And call it a job. Okay, bye.